When life itself is lived in a state of prayerfulness, there is no need of prayers. When one is intimately familiar with the book of nature, there is no need of words. Then each individual can be aware of his or her own flesh-bound volume. Balanced introspection and extrospection, going in and going out in the calm, harmonious poise, lead to awareness of the microcosm within. And in that awareness, lo, life is an open book, and they who are awake may read livingly. When troubles and problems and choices assailed me as a child, I nearly always instinctively went within and contemplated them from there. In solitude and in silence, the child instinctively sought true memory, and usually, in its mystic clear light, the pains and the problems were healed, or at least accepted. In regard to my deepest problems and in search for true direction, I did not seek outside advice, sympathy, or love. Slowly or quickly, some kind of answers were always forthcoming to my whithers and my hows and my whys. And by trial and error, by testing and by success, I learned to move and to act in the light of intuition. I came to find the guidance of the inner guru less confusing than the advice, the suggestions, and the explanations of fellow pilgrims. In regard to my own steps on the Tao, the way, I may have gone slower, even stumbled and fell, gotten hurt and scared, but I learned by my own mistakes how not to repeat them. I learned my weaknesses and my strengths, and through walking alone, the peace became part of my own natural rhythm and momentum, simple and unforced. It is true that extroverted children may need an outer guru, but always that which recognizes the guru and the guidance as true comes from within ourself. In the fullness of time, each disciple comes to realize that the real guru, like the real kingdom of the self, is ever within. It is easy to be a guru. There are many. The life and everything may be our guru. The most simple form may reveal itself to us, and they who have one end in view will make all things serve. It is the recognition that we lack, the insight, the single naked sincerity of being. And so it is that there are but few real disciples, chelas. Many like to pass as disciples, but few like to be disciples. Ego is in the way. False self-identification blocks our going, but we are all on the way. And as we become more mature, So we increase our flair for maintaining our balance and seeing our direction. In the light of intuition, the illusory ego dissolves, and Swaraj, self-rule, is. It is a matter of awakening rather than conquest. Guru was the helper. Guru is the bar. During the immediate period between the bodily ages of 7 and 14, when the ego and mind usurp the place of intuition, I recall only 2 instances of having prayed, officially, sincerely, and orally, to a God in some vague heaven outside of myself. These 2 fits of prayer occurred at the bodily age of 12, and each was a response to a crisis. The first occurred during summertime. Then, when all the cows of Viking land are led into the fertile fields, they are tied by ropes. The peg to which the rope is tied is then advanced 4 or 5 times in the course of each day, so as to allow the cows more grass. One day, in an urge of freedom, one of our cows got loose and managed to get to the clover fields, where she gobbled up a great amount of the forbidden herb. Fermentation set in and caused acute tension and a war of expansion in Daisy's tummy. And very quickly she was dying. And like the little niece, the household spirit in Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale, who in crisis knew that to him the tattered poetry book was more real than the grocer and his porridge, I also knew my values. Quickly I ran into the empty stable where I could be alone to pray fervently, and almost loudly, to God that the agonized cow might live. She was my intimate friend, and also we could ill afford to lose her. I thought my most essential help was to bring Daisy's plight to the attention of the Almighty, who could easily save us from all this calamity. However, I soon realized God thought otherwise when I found Daisy dead. I also got a sound scolding from my mother for having absented myself, gallivanting instead of helping. The grown-up children had preached at me, saying, "Ask it, and it shall be given unto you." And they had not emphasized that the perfect Father is kind of neutral in wartime. I was disappointed in him. I must have forgiven God, for shortly afterwards I tried him again, in all sincerity, when a boy who was for some years had been my dear companion on the farm chose to go back to his own family in the city. In the privacy of the smelly chicken house, I secretly and vehemently implored God that Carl might not want to go. But the Lord of hosts seemed to be a failure. He proved to be sublimely indifferent to the whims and moods and cravings of my ego. And so I gave up my short-lived external image of an exoteric God and turned instead to Henrik Ibsen. At that time, the subjective child had begun to feel puzzled by the sentimental weakness and seeming insincerity among my talkative fellow pilgrims, who called themselves believers and professors. It now seems that the awakening intolerance and the exercise of critical, analytical faculties were partly due to my misconception of the term faith, which to most of the good folks around me must have meant something external, like an overcoat or an ideal disguise, something taught by books, preachers, and teachers. While to me, it meant something living, something akin to wisdom, an almost doubtless conviction, which was simply lived and which conditioned our actions, attitudes, and relationships. That their faith or truth were not mine did not matter. I was indignant that they were not true to their own light and their own wordy professions. I felt impatient at the divergence between faith and the actual and factual daily doings of the faithful. The believers seemed make-believers. These insincere theorists and talkers became so tiresome to me because whenever I believed their words, I would be consistently let down by their deeds. And so the Viking child waxed resentfully and reacted in righteous wrath. On their various changing levels of consciousness, the good folks were no doubt true to the moment and to its moods, but the mind which just then grew on me was more single, more central, or perhaps only more blinkered. It began to judge and to condemn. It responded to the battle cry, "Not or all." If God was the truth of our being, how could we make any compromises in essential truth? I demanded of others that they be wholly and fully who they were, without pretty disguises or insincere poses. So the child memorized Henrik Ibsen's challenge and recited it to the silence. Soul, be faithful unto the last. The victory of victories is to lose everything. The loss of all constitutes your winning. Eternally, you possess or are only that which you have lost. Fancy this solemn Viking boy at the mature age of 13, responding to such a paradoxical victory through death and loss. But there was a certain recognition of inner levels of consciousness and of self-identification beyond that of ego. I felt that if I really believed livingly in God, and that it was true that all was His, all is He, I must live, talk, and be silent accordingly. I wanted to be free of poetic and sentimental lies. I saw that words, if they were not kept or were not true, became a power for evil, a kind of living lie in the soul, hindering the harmonious awareness and ease of being.